Okay, last Tuesday, Paul Dow asked us to memorize this passage, 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 3 through 10. So this morning what we're going to do is we're going to all read it together. So read with me. Don't pull out your phones. Don't look at your Bibles. It's going to be on the screen. You brought a Bible? That's cool. That's good. Let's read. His divine power has given us everything we need for life and godliness through our knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and goodness. Through these, he has given us his very great and precious promises, so that through them you may participate in the divine nature and escape the corruption in the world caused by evil desires. For this very reason, make every effort to add to your faith goodness, and to goodness, knowledge, and to knowledge, self-control, and to self-control, perseverance, and to perseverance, godliness, and to godliness, brotherly kindness, and to brotherly kindness, love. For if you possess these qualities in increasing measure, they will keep you from being ineffective and unproductive. But if anyone does not have them, he is nearsighted and blind, and has forgotten that he has been cleansed from his past sins. Therefore, my brothers, be all the more eager to make your calling and election sure, for if you do these things, you will never fall. Darrin, preach the word.
If you ask a manly man if he has a first aid kit, you're probably going to get a response like this. You mean duct tape or something along that lines, because that's how manly men operate. Well, we're on Manly Man Tuesday, our second installment of this, and I'm glad to be continuing this theme of being the men of God that he desires us to be. Manly men, not as the world sees it, but as God desires we be. Today I'm taking on the second manly maxim from Mansfield's Book of Manly Men. That's a lot of M's there. But this second manly maxim is tend your field, or we could translate it being men of responsibility. To do that today, I want us to briefly look at the example of Joseph. Joseph, the son of Jacob. Now, Joseph's story is full of lessons. And yes, it starts out a little challenging. Joseph, like many of us, starts out immature. He has some dreams, and instead of being humble with those dreams, he starts bragging to his family how they're going to bow down to him. Not a good idea for a young son and a younger sibling. He also tells on his brothers. Again, we're at two strikes. Not to mention he wears literally the coat of favoritism from his father. So it starts out shaky. But once he is thrown into that pit, his life escalates into being a man of character, a man of responsibility. So my purpose this morning in this lesson is to look at Joseph's example of responsibility so that we will be men who are responsible with everything God places in our lives. So let's look briefly at Joseph's life after the pit, after that pit that he is thrown in due to the jealousy of his brothers, where they leave him there to die, and then they come up with a better idea. Let's sell him and get some money out of him. And so they do. They sell him. And he becomes a slave in Potiphar's house. In Genesis 39, the story of how he is sold into slavery into Potiphar's house. Now, Potiphar is an officer of Pharaoh in Egypt. And as a slave, I want you to think about this, as a slave who's just been sold by his own family, he could have sulked, he could have felt sorry for himself, he could have tried to slack off at every chance he got. But instead, no matter what tasks are given to him, and we're really not told what those tasks are, whatever the task is, he does it in such a way that the slave owner, Potiphar, notices this young man. He notices him to the point that in Genesis 39:3, it says, his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to succeed in his hands. The small task that Joseph was given at the beginning, he was responsible with those small tasks. So much so that then Potiphar makes him the Lord over his entire household. He gives him credibility and status. He says, you can take on bigger responsibilities. The motivation, though, for Joseph was not money, and it wasn't comfort. He did it because responsibility mattered to Joseph. He handled the little things faithfully, and because of that, God blessed him with bigger things to be responsible over. Well, with that bigger responsibility came temptation. And of course, you know the story. Potiphar's wife, now that he has this status in the house, Potiphar's wife is around him more, and she tries to seduce him. And Joseph refused. Now, the world would have looked at this situation and told Joseph, go for it, do whatever you want. You don't owe anyone anything. Look at your situation. You've been sold into slavery. You're in a foreign land. Do whatever you want. But that wasn't Joseph's outlook on his responsibilities. He understood his responsibility, so much so that when he is tempted with this, in verse 9, he says, how then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? His mindset is so different than the world's mindset. His mindset is, I will be responsible in this. Why? Because I'm responsible to God. I answer to God. He is my authority. Yes, Potiphar is also my authority, but there's a greater authority in Joseph's life. And he says, I can't do this. I can't do this. He equated responsibility as working for the Lord, and I want you to note this, even when it's secular work, even when it isn't ministry. Everything he did, he equated with working for God. His integrity mattered more than pleasure, pride, or convenience. But his faithfulness led to consequences. There were false accusations by Potiphar's wife at him. She lied. And as a result, this responsible young man is thrown into prison. But even there in prison, his character shined. The keeper of the prison trusted Joseph so much that he puts him in charge of the other prisoners. Now, I want you to think about that for a moment. What kind of responsibilities would Joseph have as a prisoner? It may have started with just keeping a tidy prison cell. I don't know. It doesn't say what responsibilities he was given, but it was noticeably different than the other prisoners. To the point that the person over the prisoners starts saying, Joseph, you know what? I'm going to promote you as chief prisoner. You're going to look after the other prisoners. And just listen to what he says. The keeper, in verse 23, the keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed. Well, while he's in prison, another responsibility ends up in his lap. Interpreter of dreams. He may have not even known he had this responsibility, but two fellow prisoners, a cupbearer and a baker, end up in prison, and they both have amazing dreams, incredibly bizarre dreams. And Joseph tells them what these dreams mean. For one of them, it means you're going to die soon. For the other, you're going to be reinstated. And all he asked was just remember me. And they didn't. But he was responsible with that new gift that God has given him. He can interpret dreams. 2 years go by, and Pharaoh has a bizarre set of dreams. And he's looking for someone who can interpret it, and the cupbearer finally remembers, oh, there's a guy that helped me. Calls him in. He interprets Pharaoh's dreams, and you know those dreams. There's going to be 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. And I'm sure Pharaoh was relieved to understand what this bizarre dream meant. But Joseph didn't stop there. He actually gives a game plan on what Pharaoh needs to do. You need to start storing up. You need to get ready. Pharaoh, seeing the character of this young man, he's older now, but he's still a young man. Anyone's young that's under 80, okay? Let's just go with that in this room. 85. Let's shoot for 90. This man shows such character that Pharaoh says, I'm going to put you in charge of this. He actually becomes second in command in all of Egypt. That's the kind of character we see with this responsible man of God. Well, the famine does hit. And Genesis 42 through 50 tell the story of his family needing to eat. They're starving. The famine is hitting hard. And so Jacob says, go and get some bread. There's bread in Egypt. And Joseph's brothers come to Egypt. You remember his brothers, right? These are the ones that threw him in the pit. They come to Egypt. They don't recognize that Joseph, their brother, is the one that they need to go to get food, but Joseph recognizes them. And Joseph forgave his brothers. And he fed his brothers. And he welcomes his family to Egypt to live. He takes care of them. That's a man of responsibility. The forgiveness that he shows is incredible. You all have heard the verse, Genesis 50:20. You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. Through every stage, slave, prisoner, ruler, Joseph carried himself as a man who recognized God's authority over his life. And he submitted to being responsible at every stage of it. I hope I would have been like Joseph, that in being a prisoner, being a slave, no matter what came my way, I would still want to be responsible. So let's just review. In what ways, and I've got three ways that Joseph was a man of responsibility. First of all, this man grows from being an immature bragger to a man who is responsible with the small things. Because it starts small, whether he is a slave in Potiphar's house, given a few tasks to be responsible for, or whether he's just living in a prison cell and he has probably even smaller things to be responsible. He is someone who is responsible with the small things. In all of these aspects, he could have felt sorry for himself. He could have actually said, well, what can I get away with and not get in trouble? But instead, it was his attention to detail that stood out to Potiphar, that stood out to the person over the prisoners, that stood out to Pharaoh. His attention to the details, no matter what those were. He did his best because he was always focused on his heavenly authority, not just who was in charge of him here earthly. He respected his earthly masters as well, but his main concern was his heavenly authority. He was also a man, as you know, of integrity. His integrity was under fire from the get-go as a slave in Potiphar's house. He was being tempted by Potiphar's wife to not be a man of integrity, and he refused it. He refused that temptation and chose to be loyal to God rather than sin. He guarded and valued his integrity over the temporary pleasures that were being offered by Potiphar's wife. For Joseph, it was far better to suffer the penalty, even though that was false, than be disloyal to God. Integrity meant so much to Joseph. And then leadership. Because Joseph was faithful with the small things, God increased what he was responsible for. Because he was a man of integrity, he was then put in charge of feeding the world, basically. This Israelite slave is promoted to Egypt's resources, being in charge of all the resources of Egypt and saving the world, literally saving his family with bread. Joseph used his God-given gifts for the good of others, not for personal gain, but to help others. That's Joseph. So what does Joseph, being a man of responsibility, have to do with us this morning? Men, this is what God has called each one of us to be. That we are personally to be responsible for whatever God has placed in our lives. In Mansfield's book, he calls it a field that we have been given to tend. And basically, the chapter is saying, men, tend your field. Think about that illustration. A farmer has a field. Doesn't matter how big or small it is. He has a field, and he must take care of it. Sitting on the couch, playing video games, sitting on the couch, watching the game, that's not going to get your field tended. Hoping that someone else will do it, pretty unreliable. In fact, it's unrealistic to think someone else will tend my field. The farmer that is tending his field is faithful to that field. If he's a serious farmer, he will tend to his field with all seriousness and with zeal, with passion, saying, this is my responsibility, and this is what I've been given to tend. That must be our mindset. If we're going to be the men that God desires us to be, we have to see the field that is right in front of us. And you're saying, well, what is the field? The field is anything that is our responsibility. And for some of us, it may be a small field, just a few things that I'm responsible for. For others, it might be a whole lot of things that I'm responsible for. But it must become our lifestyle, men. Responsibility must be our mindset. It's not something we turn on and turn off when we care to. It must be on all the time. Look at Joseph's example. He never turned it off. He was always on guard, making sure he was responsible for the field that was in his life. The world does not operate like that. We are to be different as men of God. We are to be men who are faithful with the small things. Again, some of you may feel that my responsibilities are so small and insignificant. I mean, I've got an apartment, I have a car, I have a few classes. Gentlemen, these are your field. That is your field right now. If you're single and all you have is your apartment and your classes and this car that you're trying to keep running so you can get to class, that's your field to tend. Be responsible with it. Emulate what Joseph did and be faithful with the small things. Don't abuse this time in your life when you have a small amount of responsibilities and live carelessly or aimlessly, as if these small things really don't matter. They matter. In fact, many would say during this time in your life, when you have small responsibilities, to just say, I answer to no one. I'll do what I want. I'll act any way that I want. Recognize what Joseph recognized. God is watching how you handle the small things to see if he will increase your field. We don't have time to go through it this morning, but in Matthew 25:14 and following is the parable of the talents, where each servant is given a sufficient amount of talent. And in this case, it's funds, it's money. We could look at it as responsibilities. Each one was given what they could handle, all the way down to a person that is given a small amount. And each one of them is responsible with what the owner gave them, except the last one. And he was given the smallest amount of talents. The others increased the worth of the talents, whereas this lesser man with the lesser talents, he did nothing with it. He hid it. And the master says, you wicked and slothful servant. Wicked and lazy. Why? Because you did nothing with what you were responsible for. Don't think because you have small responsibilities that God doesn't expect much. He does. He expects you to be responsible with the small things. Integrity. Whatever you are responsible for, handle it with the highest level of integrity and honesty and faithfulness. The quickest way to lose your field is to be men without integrity. Satan is working overtime to get you to fudge the numbers a little bit, or to bend the truth here, or to take advantage of a situation for your own personal benefit. Follow the example of Joseph. Be steadfast when those times come. Joseph realized his actions wouldn't just be against Potiphar, but they would be against God. Paul says in Colossians 3:23, whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men. See every situation you're in, whether it's ministry, whether it's working on a project, whether it's working for another individual, no matter what situation you find yourself in, work as if it's for the Lord, because it is for the Lord. He is our authority. Think of integrity as the fence that guards your life, that guards your field. Without that fence, it's vulnerable. You lose it, and you lose other people's trust in you, and many times you lose the blessings that God has given you. Jesus said in Luke 16:10, one who is faithful in very little is also faithful in much. That's who we want to be. But listen to the second part of that. And one who is dishonest in very little is also dishonest in much. Don't ever try to minimize, well, it was just this little thing at this little time. If you're dishonest with little, you'll be dishonest with much. Responsibility means you guard your integrity. And third, leadership. As Joseph's responsibilities grew, so did his leadership. But he never led for himself. He led for the good of others. Some of you are single right now, but one day you will have a spouse possibly and a family. And your responsibility to them is not just to provide for them financially. That is one of your responsibilities. But there's more than just that. Your responsibility is also to lead them spiritually. I think of what Joshua said in Joshua 24:15, but as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Your family is counting on you to responsibly lead them, tend to your field. Leadership means putting your household above your own desires, above your own wants. Instead, we follow the example of Christ, who emptied himself, putting on the form of a servant for our benefit. That's who we are to be like. I want to share an illustration. Many years ago, almost 40, I had quite a hobby and a lifestyle. I was a hot rodder. And one day I entered this car in a car show like I often did. And I went over and I bought this beautiful Boss air cleaner for my hot rod. Because if you see in the picture of that one that was on it currently, it was too wimpy. And so I went and bought this beautiful piece of aluminum. And I'm walking down the rows between the cars, and I'm smiling ear to ear. And this beautiful young lady is coming towards me also, only she has a confused look on her face. It's Pearl. And she has a confused look on her face because 6 months prior to this car show, I had received a bigger field than I once had. I'm now a married man. 6 months ago, prior, I was a single man, and I did what I wanted. But she's looking at me confused, and I said, "What's up?" And she says, "What's that?" And I said, "It's my new air cleaner." And she said, "That was our grocery money for the month." I failed to tend my new field that I had been given. We did all right. We didn't starve. We got through the month. But it was a wake-up call to me that God had placed new responsibilities in my life, and I hadn't stepped up yet. And in fact, I had to kind of let go of that lifestyle, even that passion that I had for all those things, because God had given me something greater, a family, a different life, a different purpose. Still have the air cleaner, don't have the car. And it's still boss. Your leadership in the home is very important. But gentlemen, many of you are here and are going to go into ministry. And your leadership in the church is just as important. Will you be leaders that are there for power or to promote my agenda, that I couldn't wait to get into this position so that I can tell the church how it ought to be and how I want it to be? Or will you be a blessing to your congregation? We want to be leaders in the church that help increase the kingdom, not divide it. Be leaders who are responsible in the position God has placed you in. Joseph is quite a man to emulate, and I have fallen short many times, as I just illustrated. But I'm working harder every day to be the man that God wants me to be, especially in this field of responsibility. So I want you to ask yourself, what has God placed in my field right now? Is it school? Probably for many of you, yes. A job, my family, my friendships, my walk with Christ? Well, how am I tending it? Am I tending it well? Do I treat the small things as if they belong to God, or am I pretty flippant with the small things? Am I working as unto the Lord in my daily tasks? Where's my integrity being tested? Joseph's came through temptation. Yours might come through laziness or dishonesty, selfishness. Your integrity is being bombarded at every chance Satan gets. Will you remain steadfast? And finally, how am I leading? Even if your field is small, someone is watching you. Someone is watching how you are tending your responsibilities. Your faithfulness right now sets the tone for how you will be with bigger responsibilities. So this week, I challenge you to look at one area of your field that you recognize needs tending. Maybe it's keeping your word. Maybe it's simply keeping my apartment a little cleaner. Finishing an assignment that I kind of blew off. Or making time for prayer that I have been lax in. Commit to it. Tend it, just as Joseph did. I leave you with this. Men, tend your field.